Okay, so this, as David said, I've been interested in 3D for a long time, and my interest is usually down the bottom of the range of 3D stuff that's like maybe one step up from a toy. You're all probably bored to death with my constantly referring to Viewmaster, which I'm sure we'll squeeze something in later today. Because all the stuff that's down the bottom end is quite often the stuff that gets ignored. It's all the expensive and all the posh stuff that most people like to do the research. So the Vistascreen Stories, really, my research started at a chance encounter at a camera fair about 20 years ago. There was a one-off camera fair in Ponders End at the leisure centre there. And as usual, I was there with a table full of bits and pieces and Viewmaster stuff and other stereo stuff. And this guy just wandered up, picked up a Vistascreen viewer and a packet of Vistascreen cards and just said to me, "Oh, Vistascreen, I took those." He just put the stuff down and just wandered off and left me like shell shocked on the. So I quickly ran after him and just managed to grab his name. But I was so surprised to find somebody like that that I didn't really get any of his contact details. So luckily, with some assistance from Keith from the Stereoscopic Society, we did actually manage to track the guy down. So this was originally written in 2006 and has been added to over the years. So if you mention Vistascreen to most people, they might sort of scratch their heads. But then when you say Weetabix, they'll probably know what you're talking about, because the Weetabix stereo cards were given away with the serial packs back in the 60s. So although they may not be aware of the Vistascreen name, most people will know the Weetabix name. So there's the two versions. So this is the guy. So back in the 50s, this is Stanley Long, who was an ambitious young man. He'd done his national service in the RAF in 1949, where he learnt his photographic craft. And when he was demobbed, he went into central London. He worked for Studio Fleet in London and then served as an assistant photographer to Maurice Ambler, who was a sort of fairly high profile society and general photographer. So he's certainly served his apprenticeship, and after being an assistant photographer for so long, he was getting cold feet and decided it was time to think about striking out on his own. And the chance came when he was approached by two brothers, which is Jeff and Jack Spring, and they ran Capital Paper Company in central London. And they were looking to diversify into products that used paper. And they hit upon the idea of publishing art books, what we would call as glamour books or nudie books, stag films and things like that. And there was a big market for these in the 1950s. So between them, they set up Capital Studios, with Stanley originally as photographer and then later coming on to be a director. Now, their studio and darkroom were at 16 Soho Square in London. And with the help of a publisher, Wally Holman, they started to produce a monthly book of tasteful nudes, sort of a bit like Health and Efficiency, but maybe one step down from that, or up, depending on where you're looking, I guess. So the girls in these books were photographed by Stanley, and although this venture proved to be quite successful, they were always thinking about products that use paper. So in the 50s, the Sawyers company pretty much had the 3D world sewn up with their Viewmaster system. They carved themselves a real niche market in the UK and around the world. But most of the Viewmaster's foreign subjects, obviously it's an American-based company, they only had a handful of British subjects. And obviously overseas travel or holidays abroad were way out of the reach of most of the UK population. So much of the Viewmaster output was really of limited interest to people in the UK. Stanley Long was convinced that there was gaps in the ViewMaster market that he could exploit. So after some thought and with absolutely no experience whatsoever in stereo photography, but obviously plenty of experience in conventional photography, he pretty much single-handedly invented and produced what was one of the more commercially successful of all modern 3D systems, the Vistascreen. So Stanley admits there was nothing really original about the Vistascreen concept. It was basically a cheap alternative to ViewMaster, but obviously based around UK subjects. And to keep the costs down, all the photographs were to be done in black and white and prints, whereas obviously the ViewMaster things were all in colour. And it hoped that these sets would eventually go on to replace the local concertina style sets of postcards, which were then on sale at most newsagents in seaside towns and around the country, where you go and you buy a set of coloured postcards to send back to your friends and family back home. Because obviously in the 50s there was a big market for these photographs, because again not many people had their own cameras and certainly weren't shooting in colour. So he explained to his fellow directors his idea, and they thought it was a surefire winner. So a set of test photographs were taken, and the difficult part was now how to make a cheap but reliable viewer. So he set about designing a viewer and quickly decided that it would be based on the viewer that came with the Coronet 3D camera. This is a very similar version of it, which was advertised again with girly pictures in it. The problem with this viewer was it had a fairly heavy metal base and reasonably high quality glass lenses and a rear diffuser screen. So really copying all these sort of features would make a viewer that was too expensive to sell really as an impulse buy. They wanted to retail it at 2 and 6 a time, and they needed to build in a 50% discount for wholesalers. So there was not really much leeway on the manufacturing costs. In fact, it was thought that the Vistascreen viewers had to be made for just 8p each, and that's all in. So simple glass lenses and metal parts were obviously out. So quotes were got together for all injection molded version. And after trying several suppliers, most of them had trouble in producing a reasonable quality, thin but distortion-free injection molded plastic product, a company in Peckham in South London was chosen. Unfortunately, Stanley can't remember the name of this company, unless anybody else with Peckham connections does. But he thought that they employed some blind workers, which was presumably one way that they could have an edge on the production costs over other competitors. So after a few experiments, they managed to get the viewer body right, but the problem was now the lenses. After a few false starts, they finally teamed up with Combined Optical Industries in Slough, who came up with a lens that could be produced by injection moulding and at the right price. And these were made in batches of 50, and to keep the costs down again, the viewers were all assembled by outworkers and then sent off to the head office in Soho. So for a short time, Coronet in Birmingham produced a limited number of stereo card sets that were used in conjunction with this viewer. They're really difficult to find these days, and the few sets that I found include Paris, Rome, some famous statues, and Canterbury. And they were really the inspiration for the Vistascreen viewers. These stereo pics were originally in packs of 10, just like Vistascreen ended up. And they were bound into the little folders with gum for ease of production and packing. But obviously, to actually view them, you had to unstick them from their folders. So it's really unusual to find a set that's still stuck in their folders today. So in Stanley's own colourful phrase, he called the Vistascreen system a kick, bollock and scramble operation. But in total, they managed to put together over 300 sets, most of which were photographed by Stanley, although some other photographers were occasionally used for some of the UK sets and for most of the European sets. So there's a few different promotional leaflets which were usually included in with the viewers, but there's not been a definitive list of all of the sets available. And on my spreadsheet currently, I've got over 350 sets, including commercially produced ones. So when the Vistascreen viewer was at the sampling stage, it was decided that photography should be started and the operation put into place to produce the range. Jack Spring had contacts in the print finishing world, so he organised the printing of the boxes and the design of the logo, and photography commenced in 1957. And they drew up a list of famous places and sites of interest, including caves and zoos, seaside towns, all those sort of things. And at that time, some stately homes were starting to open their doors to the public, and Stanley thought that these would make a good series of subjects for 3D. And they set about selling the idea to the souvenir kiosks and the shops which were usually available in these places of interest. So the amount of time that they could spend photographing each location was really limited. So when he went into a new town, he went straight to the local newsagents and he brought one of those sets of concertina postcards that we'd mentioned earlier. So there he had a ready-made idea of the sorts of places of interest in that town, and he was whizzed off to those local hotspots to photograph the scenes that he already knew were going to be popular, which was quite inspired when you think about it. So occasionally unexpected opportunities did present themselves when he was out and about. And sometimes he would, particularly when he was along the south coast, he would drive past a holiday camp or a caravan site, and he would pop into the shop there and say, would you like me to photograph your site so you can sell these pictures to your visitors? Now, obviously, these had limited appeal because, you know, unless you were actually staying in the campsite, then not many people wanted pictures of them. But again, say not many people at the time had the facility to take their own photos, so you could bore your friends and family with pictures of the holiday camp that somebody else had taken. And all these sets, which don't appear on any ordinary Vistascreen list, they were all designated as H series. I'm not exactly sure what the H stands for, but there were, so far I've managed to find 54 of these sets, and the vast majority of which were usually along the south coast of England, which is obviously where a lot of holiday camps and caravan sites and places of interest were. There's a few in Norfolk and Suffolk, and just literally a couple in Yorkshire and around the north of England. So while he was out on his travels, he would phone back to the office. Obviously, no mobile phones in those days, and he would get a list of places that he could go to on his travels. He was usually not away for more than 5 days at a time, and obviously any more than that, he would have a bit of a backlog because he was processing the films as he went on his way. So there was to help with the advertising, there was a small freestanding cardboard display stand which they produced, which went in the shops. And I've yet to find any example or any photograph or any other reference to these to this sort of point of sale stuff, apart from what Stanley had mentioned. But I did manage to find this a few years ago, which unfortunately has got a couple of pieces missing, but it's a jigsaw puzzle. It's about 8 inches square, and it's just promoting the Vista Screen set of Winchester. So this must be the rarest part of my reasonably extensive Vista Screen collection. So the photography that when he was out and about, say, he had no time to mess around. If the weather was bad, if it was raining, if it was blazing sunshine, he took the photographs pretty much regardless. And that's completely unlike Vistascreen. Unlike Viewmaster. If you look at pretty much any Viewmaster set, you'll always find that the photographs have been taken on a perfect sunny day. Obviously, most of them in America, where maybe their weather's slightly better than ours in most places, but you never see Viewmaster pictures taken in the rain or without a blue sky and white fluffy clouds. Well, Stanley had to shoot wherever he was, whatever the light was, whatever the weather was doing. But because he only ever used black and white film, that meant that the contrast could be adjusted when he was developing the plates at a later time. And he was pretty ruthless in his photography. He had a plate back on his camera which shot a maximum of 12 photographs. So he would edit the 12 photographs down to the 10 which were used in each Vistascreen set. And because he was duplicating the classic shots in each area, he knew pretty much what was going to be popular. So he only spent a couple of hours shooting each set. And only a couple of times in his recollection did he manage to either completely mess up the processing, and have to go back and reshoot anything. So the quality of the photographs had to be as good as possible to start with, because by the time the finished product was produced, they were around about 5th generation copies. So with quality in the forefront of his mind, Stanley used a 1920s Raleigh hydroscope with a plate back. And this was for practically all of the pictures that he shot for Vistascreen. And he still had that camera with him when I interviewed him in 2006. He had around 6 different plate backs, and these were reloaded in the evenings when he got back to the hotel or to the guest house where he was staying. And he processed the plates in the sink or in the bathroom of wherever he was staying. Occasionally, he had a Revere stereo camera which shot 35mm stereo pairs, but the reason for using the hydroscope was pretty much the size of the images could be contact printed into the finished thing. And the glass plates fitted onto his homemade printing frame, and he just literally contact printed everything as he went along. So he was clocking up about 2,000 miles a week, which was pretty good going in those days, because obviously there were no motorways. Occasionally he would leave London about 3 o'clock in the morning, 200 or 300 miles under his belt. He would arrive at his destination at 9 o'clock. He would maybe grab a quick breakfast. He would get his set of postcards ready, jump into the car, and obviously take out, ready to go off to take his pictures. This picture of him, which we saw earlier, is actually him in the banqueting room at Woburn Abbey, and this it's not actually in the Vistascreen set. It's one that this is one of his outtakes. I think he should have maybe left that in the Vistascreen set, because he looks just like the butler, just standing there. And for these pictures, you can just there's some lights in the background there, but he used a multi-flash technique to do most of these big room interiors. He had three heads, and this is a technique that he refined while he was in the RAF. Seemed to work pretty well, and if you look at the quality of the pictures, they stand up even today. So as I mentioned, he got the negatives were contact printed using his frame, so that they would fit onto one sheet of paper where they were printed. This is also a remarkable survivor. This is an uncut set of 10 pictures from Westminster Cathedral. So this is as it came back from the printers. It got all the titles stripped in down the middle there with the name and the scene number, and then these were cut up, and again they were all stuck into the folders by art workers. To produce the master negative, the 10 glass stereo pairs were laid out onto a sheet of P1200 plate film to make a positive. And that in turn was contacted into another plate to make a negative. So the captions stripped in, and then it was they were touched up if needed be, and then they were sent off to the London Postcard company in Twickenham for printing. And originally, this company was not too interested in Vistascreen, as they thought that the quantities were not going to be large enough for their operation. Obviously, printing postcards, they print them by the 1,000, if not by the 10,000. But they were talked into it, and eventually they were quite pleased with the amount of work that that Vistascreen put their way. For any quality concerns, Stanley occasionally was called back to make a few changes to the master negative, but most of the time they were just printed and away they go. He used FP3, Ilford FP3 plates in his camera, because although that was a slightly slow film for the time, they tended to be less contrasted than the Kodak equivalent. And this was a definite bonus because, as we've seen, they were copied several times. A lot of processing was done back at their offices in Soho Square, where they actually had about 1,500 square feet studio, offices and darkrooms. He did have an assistant there occasionally, but most of the time he was pretty much working on his own. As we said, the bulk of these pictures were sold on site as like a visitor souvenir, and some sets were printed multiple times. Stanley says he remembers a particularly large order of several thousand sets for the London Zoo set, which he did when they were launched. And they actually produced 2 different sets for London Zoo. So Vistascreen had sales agents around the country, and which was pretty well common for the time, and they handled all the local distribution. But as we mentioned earlier, some of their output was for the glamour market. And the normal shops weren't too keen on handling what they saw as the sleazy end of the girly 3D market. So a lot of these were produced and sold by mail order. They did have their book publishing outlets, but a lot of these were sold in the back of magazines for the discerning gentleman. Presumably they were delivered in a brown paper envelope with no identifying marks on the outside. So as well as generating a good part of the Vistascreen income, the nudie sets did serve another purpose, because one of the photographers who helped Stanley was Larry Neal, and he ended up marrying one of the nude models. Sounds like a good fringe benefit to me. This is another really unusual set. This is the Irving Theatre in Soho, which is pretty much understood to be the first strip club in Soho. This was like in between If It Moves, It's Rude, which was happening just up the road, and then a proper strip club. So the Irving Theatre, it does say set 1, but I've never seen, set 1 is incredibly rare, and I've never seen or heard of even set 2. So there's some of the girls there displaying their wares. So Vistascreen also offered a commercial service where, if you wanted to, you could have your own dedicated set. There's the middle one there is one of the holiday camps, which he did. The Tay Valley Wholesale Company at the bottom was a huge printing and distribution company for postcards in the down in the southwest of England. They produced their own version of the Ilfracombe set, and the Model Village one at the top, Bolton on the Water. These are really unusual to find, these personalised viewers. This is one that I found in my own collection not all that long ago, because I hadn't even bothered to look at the back of it. So this was obviously produced for the co-op. I've got no idea what the pictures would have been. Can't find any reference to it anywhere else. So the golden rule is, if you're looking for a Vistascreen viewer, always look on the back, because you never know what you're going to find. Talk of the Town, this is a great set. So not only though they've got a customized viewer, they've got all the pictures around the Talk of the Town nightclub in Leicester Square, and they've even produced their own customized box on the Talk of the Town. And these things are still coming out of the woodwork. This one I spotted on eBay just about 2 weeks ago, and it looked for all the world just like a bog standard set which comes up all the time. But there you can see the viewer is branded as the Chester Zoological Gardens. And this is another one which came up about a month ago on eBay, which I put in a ridiculously huge bid for and got outbid. And I'm guessing it's probably because somebody who went to George Heriot's school in 1959 had to have that set, because the pictures are taken in and around the school, which is in Hertfordshire, I think. And they were obviously very proud to be commemorating 300 years since the founding of the school. So they produced their own set. So never seen or heard of this set until just literally a couple of weeks ago on eBay. So they did several specialist sets. This is football, which was really meant to be just a generic football. It doesn't mention the club anywhere, because obviously they would have probably wanted their some money for that. But it does include the only 3D picture of Jimmy Greaves, which is one, I think it's probably Manchester United, then, is it? One of the, sorry that some of these have got my watermark all over them. It's because where they've been, where I've sold duplicates on eBay, that to stop people pinching my pictures. So this is the London Airport set, which has got some pictures in and around the airport, and some really amazing pictures taken from inside the control tower. This is another idea that they had, which was to produce Vistascreen sets based around films which were coming out. This was the first and only one they actually managed to do. So this was called The Cinema, and it was shot in 1958, which was the making of No Time to Die, which was a film starring Anthony Newley and Victor Mature. I think that's Anthony Newley there. So that's the only one that they did on cinema, because it was coming towards the end of its life by then. They also did a set on television, similar to the behind the scenes on the London Airport set. And these sets are actually sought after by people that are interested in early TV things, because it's got some really amazing pictures of behind the scenes in the TV studios. These were shot at the ATV studios in Elstree. So these are very interesting. This is back at the theatre. It's the only known 3D shot of Dame Judy Dench. You can have the Crazy Gang. I'm sure there must be one or two people out there that are old enough to remember the Crazy Gang. Is my hero, Monsieur Eddie Gray. The only known 3D set of the Crazy Gang was in the theatre set, and the TV set even included Tommy Cooper in 3D. So they were pretty much ahead of their time, but time was marching on. Recently, I came across this on eBay, which only popped up because one of my eBay searches is for Vistascreen. Never seen or heard of this before. It obviously says Vistascreen down the bottom. It's all in French. And the guy had a couple of these, and this was selling his duplicate. So I thought, well, got to have that for my collection. And then blow me, about 2 months later, this lot turned up, which is a complete set of the Vistascreen French views, which again, completely unrecorded. Nobody's seen or heard of them. Stanley Long only very briefly mentioned it in passing. Interestingly, as you can see, they're all marked Capital Productions with an address in Paris. And if you're still awake, you probably remember that back at the beginning, the company that marketed Vistascreen was called Capital in London. So this is, again, completely unknown until fairly recently. And interestingly, the viewer, this has been sort of enhanced, which is why the colours are a bit weird. The Vistascreen viewer at the bottom is a standard Vistascreen viewer, stamped Made in England at the top. But the one at the top, which came in the French pack, doesn't have the Made in England logo on it. So maybe the French were even anti-England even back in those days. So we're on to the beginning of the end. So Stanley was really raking the money in. By 1956, he was on a salary of £17 a week, which was pretty respectable in those days. And as a director, he was on to a share of the profits. But it came to be a bit of a fallout between all the directors because there was a misunderstanding about how the profits were actually arrived at. And eventually Stanley left Vistascreen in 1958. So without a full-time photographer and no new sets being added, the Vistascreen system started to die out. And eventually they sold everything out to Weetabix, who took over and were selling the viewers off the back of their packs of cereal, and they were giving away the cards in the cereal pack. So several different sets to collect, including British cars and animals and British birds. But if you've ever tried to collect a set of everything, you know that you always end up with 6 number 5s and 5 number 6s and no number 7. It was really difficult to find complete sets. But they went on for quite some time. So, so there's the card at the top, which was given away in the pack. And when you wanted your viewer, you could send away 1 and 6, and you would get your Weetabix viewer. So it was exactly the same as a Vistascreen viewer, but it was branded as Weetabix on the back. Now, one of the sets that they used, that they produced, was British birds. And up until very recently, nobody knew anything about these sets. I even went as far as a couple of years ago, phoning Weetabix, who are still around, obviously, their offices are in Burton Latimer, just to see if there was anybody there that still had any memory or they had any archive of the Weetabix promotional sets that they did. I managed to speak to one of the directors who'd been there at the time. He did remember the promotion, but had no idea who did it, what happened to them or anything. That was until Andrew Hurst, who's Secretary of the Stereoscopic Society, who's with us today, happened to pass this on to me. This is Pat Whitehouse, who was one of the stalwarts of the Stereoscopic Society, very accomplished stereoscopic photographer. And Andrew sent me this clipping, which, as you can see in the highlighted section there, confirms that she was producing the 3D bird photographs for Vista, for what was then Weetabix. Now the camera.
Right.
So the 4 rings are all to you.
Yeah. Okay.
The camera there that Pat's using looks like a Veriscope camera, but that isn't what she used. This is what she used. These are the actual cameras that Pat Whitehouse took. The reason there's 3 pictures of each is because if you can cross-eye view, you can go cross-eyed, you can look at the middle picture and you'll see it 3D on your screen. So these are adapted cameras that Pat used to actually take those photographs for the Weetabix set. So uniquely, we know who took them, what the results were, and what the cameras were that she used. it will give you a headache if you stare at them for too long. So she produced the pictures in a Viewmaster set as well. On the left, you can see the Pat Whitehouse show. This is still available. You can get it from the Stereoscopic Society, I expect, or you might find it on eBay. And it includes some amazing 3D pictures that she took. So coming to the end of, we've now got some copies of Vista Screens. These are the Australian version. So Weetabix in Australia, for some reason, is called Weet-Bix and not Weetabix. I guess it's the same product, and it's made over there. They produced their cards and they called them True to Life. And there's obviously the Vista Screen viewer there. And they used a thing called a viewer scope, which again is a Vista Screen with the obviously the tooling's been changed to produce this version. There's also this, which is called a 3D picture viewer. Obviously, it's a blatant copy. Ian, we can hear you. So this is a modern copy of the 3D viewer, which was made in Hong Kong, I guess, in the 60s, when I expect this dates from. They were copying stuff just like the Chinese do today. This one's available on eBay at the moment, and it's a 3D viewer, but it's obviously been broken and somebody's replaced the front bit with the Vista Screen viewing section. So that proves that it is an exact copy of the Vista Screen because all the parts are completely interchangeable. So that's pretty much the end of Vista Screen and its clones, but just very briefly, Stanley Long didn't end his photographic career there. After he left the Vista Screen company, he went on to work in the film industry. He was cinematographer for several years, and then he went on to develop this. Now, if you're a gentleman of a certain age, like I am, and you lived in central London and you were a kid in the early 60s, you may have gone to Leicester Square to the News Theatre, which was pretty much a continuous showing of cartoons. My auntie used to take me there every year on our annual trip into London. But before it was the News Theatre, it was London's first 360-degree cinema. It was called Circlerama, and Circlerama was actually invented in Russia. Only had one film, which was a very boring Russian travelogue. It was brought into London, and they built a special 360-degree cinema in Piccadilly Circus, and it was pretty much bombing because who wanted to go into central London and see a travelogue of Russia? So Stanley Long, here he is, down in the bottom left here. He decided that he would make a new 360-degree film of London, and he would shoot it all on 16mm. And he decided that if you got 11, don't ask me why it's 11 and not 12, synchronized Bolex 16mm cine cameras, strapped them onto this, stuck them on the top of a car or onto a boat, went down the Thames, went around the streets of London, you could produce 360-degree film of London. And that's exactly what he did. It was fairly popular for a few years, but again, with central London rent and everything, it didn't really, and with only one film, it didn't really go any further. But he went on to produce and make an absolute fortune out of sexploitation films, I guess we could call it, in the 70s. He produced Adventures of a Taxi Driver, Adventures of a Plumber's Mate, Adventures of a Private Eye, about half a dozen others. When I went to see him in 2006, I think it was, he had just licensed these 3 films to Channel 4 to show them once, and he got paid 125,000 quid. So he was doing okay. So after starting off in 3D, going into glamour photography and ending up as a producer. He's done pretty well out of his career. So there's your man. There he is with the actual camera. Sadly, he passed away in 2012. He was a bit of a character. When I went to see him, he just showed me his underground pond he'd just built. He showed me all the JCBs that he'd had in to help dig out his back garden. And I said, didn't the neighbours complain about all this noise and all the groundwork going on? He said, oh no. He said, Dickie's very understanding about these things. Turned out Dickie was Dickie Attenborough, who was his next door neighbour. So there you go. Sadly missed, a man with plenty of tales to tell, and I think we've probably only heard half of them. Phew.